This episode of the Beer Bound Podcast is brought to you by Rolling Hops Beer Tours.
Hey everybody, Garrett here from Rolling Hops, as always joined with my partner,
Andy.
We're here to tell you guys about our virtual craft beer tour offering. With what's going on in the world, unfortunately, we haven't been able to run our historical craft walking beer tours, so we've pivoted to taking the virtual experience of craft beer directly to you guys. Wonderful for team building events, corporate events, even just a night out or in, for that matter, with your friends and family. And we're doing this online.
Have any questions about the beer tours or want us to tailor make an event for you? Just shoot us an email or send us a message on any form of social media. Rolling Hops, you can find us everywhere.
RollingHopsBeerTours.com is where you can get a hold of us, and we'll see you guys soon.
Cheers.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Beer Bound Podcast. We are excited to be joined by Robin Ridesic, founder and CEO of the Exchange Brewery. Located in one of Canada's most beautiful towns, Niagara-on-the-Lake, the Exchange Brewery occupies an optimal presence to this popular tourist destination. The Niagara region, more popularly known for its colossal presence of vineyards and wineries, has had a growing presence of craft breweries flourishing throughout. With brewing and agricultural roots that stretch back to the late 1700s, Niagara-on-the-Lake is the perfect location for the Exchange's approach to brewing, which blends traditional and modern techniques and equipment. Exchange's great beer selection includes a range of American styles, along with sour and funky Belgian-style beers and ales. We're looking forward to learning more about the Exchange Brewery. So without further ado, we welcome Robin to the Beer Bound Podcast. Hello, Robin.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So Robin's joining us via phone and video. Robin, can you start us off? Just tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about Exchange Brewery as well, and how you got connected to the world of craft beer.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Robin Ridesic. I currently live in Niagara-on-the-Lake, have been here for the last dozen years or so. I started the Exchange Brewery back in 2016. We're located right on the main street here in Niagara-on-the-Lake. We opened our doors with a 10-barrel brew house, as well as a tasting room that features 2 bars and 8 taps in each bars and a retail store. And when I was writing the business plan back in the day, I actually envisioned creating a brewery that was effectively the Russian River of the North. And I don't know, Andy, if you're familiar with Russian River, but it's a really awesome California brewery in Sonoma that was basically the trailblazers of American sour beer production, as well as big hoppy beers. And so I visited them, fell in love with their beers, and decided one day I would like to start a brewery that was effectively the Russian River of the North. And so that's what I like to think of our little Exchange Brewery as. And we focus a lot on Belgian-style beers, in particular sour beers, as well as big hoppy beers.
Yeah, it's awesome. If listeners and viewers haven't been, Exchange Brewery, it's quite a posh location. It's not it's not maybe, I don't know if I can say this, but maybe not your typical craft brewery, in the sense of it is quite, it's aesthetically beautiful on the outside as well as the interior. So can you tell us a little bit about why you chose Niagara-on-the-Lake? Did it choose you? What's the story behind your location?
Yes, and thank you for the compliments on the aesthetic of the brewery, Andy. I appreciate that. I used to always describe most craft beer breweries as like exposed brick and chalkboards, and I wanted to create something that had a very different feel. Still comfortable and really approachable, hopefully, but I'd like to think of it as being kind of a classier version with a lot of black and white and marble, and a nice place to sit down and enjoy a beer. But I was drawn to Niagara-on-the-Lake for a couple of reasons. At the time, I actually lived in Toronto. was working for a global management consulting firm, but dreaming of starting this brewery one day. And my husband and I owned a place that was effectively like our cottage in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And so I became quite familiar with the area. And when I started writing the business plan, there weren't any other breweries in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And it seemed to be such an obvious gap that needed to be filled. Thankfully, other breweries have opened in the last 6 or 8 years. And so I do have fellow great brewers in Niagara. But at the time, there weren't any. And so that was one of the draws here. But also another draw was kind of the sense of place and effectively the natural environment that really supported what we wanted to do at the brewery. And so we do a lot of Belgian-style beers that go through barrels. We purchase barrels from our winery neighbors. We do a lot of fruited sours. And we purchase the fruit from the region whenever we possibly can. It's always Ontario, but ideally Niagara-on-the-Lake specifically. But even things like we do spontaneous ales, and spontaneous ales use the natural yeast from the region. And so we create little cool ships that catches the yeast out of the air that we then propagate and use in our brews. And you can't do that in the city. You don't have the same kind of yeast floating around there that you do here at harvest time. And so there was a lot of reasons that drew me to Niagara-on-the-Lake. And I certainly can't say that I regret it. It's been a wonderful place to both start a business as well as raise my children, which I have 4 of. So they're a big part of my life also.
So you're not from the Niagara region originally, that's fair to say?
I was Toronto born and raised, and then transplanted my family here.
Do you like it? Do you like the change, or do you miss the big city?
Yeah, well, I still get my fix of the big city between work and friends and family. I'm in the city pre-pandemic. I was in there probably every other week. So I feel like I got my city fix. When I was in my 20s, would I wanted to live in a small town? Probably not. But once I had children and your life kind of starts revolving around them and work, it's a great community. It's a great town. There's a lot to see and do. Great restaurants, great wineries, great theater. The Shaw is such a wonderful experience. I love living in Niagara-on-the-Lake.
Not to mention it's absolutely gorgeous. Just
Yeah,
having that as a setting for your home, I think is fantastic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And during the pandemic, we certainly have really appreciated having the natural resources that we have here, the access to the lake and all the wonderful walking trails and golf courses and just space and big backyards and all of that. So I appreciated it pre-pandemic, and I appreciate it even more now.
I'm actually the opposite of you. I grew up in Niagara and now live in Toronto, but
that's interesting.
Didn't grow up in the beautiful Niagara-on-the-Lake, though. I grew up in the big ugly brother, St. Catharines.
Don't be so hard on St. Catharines. It's a wonderful town.
It's not, but that's nice of you to say. But yeah, the space is definitely nice. Of course, it's a different scenery. Probably very nice for your children to grow up there, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the building itself, and I believe its connection to the name of the brewery?
Yeah, absolutely. So the building was the first telephone exchange in Niagara. So back in the day, it had a switchboard, and you'd call it, and the women working there would connect you through to whoever you were trying to call, of which originally I think there was about 10 different places you could call in Niagara. And so the fact that it was a telephone exchange ended up being a big inspiration for our branding. And so we named the brewery, obviously, the Exchange Brewery. And I've also been inspired by the numbers and how the numbers of the telephone and the symbols from the telephone and how we actually label our beers. And so we use a nomenclature, which is a number system for all of our clean beers. And we use symbols for all of our barrel-aged beers. And the number system effectively is the lower numbers are lighter and easier drinking, and the higher numbers are bigger and bolder. And so, our double IPA is a 10, whereas our wheat beers are a 1. And we use the symbols for our barrel-aged beers. And we started off with a hashtag and the star, and then have kind of developed beyond that as we've created more and more different brews.
That's really cool. I was actually going to ask about that because I was wondering if the numbers were, obviously about something, and there it is. That's a great way to put it, especially, um, for those looking to get into craft beer or just get into beer in general. If you could just do it by a number system, from less bold to more bold. That's clever. I like that.
Yeah, yeah, and actually the inspiration came from some of the monks sometimes don't name their beers, they just number them or color code them. They're kind of anti-marketing and they keep it really simple, but when it communicates something as far as the intensity of the beer, I actually think it's quite helpful. So we liked it and we picked it up.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. And actually, I was going to ask you about the vast amount of beer selection that is on the website. So, I don't know if you're going to run out of symbols, but but I wanted to ask about the selection. Like, if how do you come up with so many different styles? Is there a rhyme or reason to having that many? Like, typically there are quite a few options in craft beer in Southern Ontario, but you guys have, man, there's like 3 pages full of styles there.
Yes. I would say we have a few more than the average craft brewery, but it's kind of what we're all about. We're all about innovating and constantly experimenting and trying new things. We brew more than 40 different beers every year. And so there's some that we bring back every year. There's some that we try new every year, but it's just part of our DNA that we love experimenting. We get a lot of being located where we are. Niagara College has a great brewing program. And so we get a lot of wall students at the brewing program who are working in the brewery, both in the tasting room and in the back of house. And we just encourage anyone and everyone who has an idea to bring it forward and we will brew it. And so we have a lot of fun trying new things and seeing what works, what doesn't work, and kind of evolving from there.
Yeah, that's great. I'm all for selection, as anyone who listens to this, or Andy probably knows, and anyone we talk to. So I think it's absolutely a great thing. But I guess with more, the larger quantity of styles, I'm assuming it probably comes with some challenges. Like, is there anything big that stands out to keep a big variety like that?
Yes, it obviously adds more complexity. The only reason we can do it is because we have a small system and we are small and nimble. The biggest challenge for us as far as brewing the diversity of beers that we'd like to is actually the packaging of them. Our kind of bigger Belgian beers and our sour beers, we always try to put those in our bottles, which are either 330 ml or 750 ml. They're beautiful black Italian sparkling bottles, but we do try to put our clean beers through cans, and we historically have been using a mobile canning line, and so then you have to have larger batches in order for the economics to make sense. So that right. Certainly has been a limitation we have faced. However, we have a canning line on order, and so we're really excited for the delivery of that, because it'll give us a lot more flexibility to kind of support from a packaging side the diversity of the SKUs that we have. And that'll just give us a lot more flexibility and freedom, which we're excited with. But for sure, it's something we are constantly managing with that many different brews. We have to manage very closely our inventory. Some of our beers age up to 3 years. So we have beers in barrels for a long time, then we have them bottle conditioning a long time. So, our head brewer, Sam, has complex spreadsheets managing all of the inventory and the barrels and the fermenters and where everything is at in the process. That would be much simpler if we were a steam whistle and had one SKU.
Of course. Well, the bottles are beautiful. They look very, very elegant. Definitely something that would stand out on the shelf for sure. I know with, the pandemic over the last little while and how some craft brewers that we've been speaking with, there is that push to migrate almost entirely towards cans. Have you guys felt that, or is it something you want to definitely keep going forward?
Yeah, I mean, we love our bottles, but yes, we have moved towards cans more and more over time because it is what the market is looking for. If you sell at grocery, it's basically the only thing they're interested in buying there. And so we have sold our bottles into grocery stores, and we do regularly at the LCBO have different bottles. But the market, for some reason in Ontario, loves cans. And the reason it frustrates me is I feel like we have the best recycling or reuse program, I think, in the world, via the beer store for reusing beer bottles, and yet for some reason we consumers like to go towards energy intensive aluminum cans. But it is what it is. What the consumer wants is what we make, and so we do continue to make the bottles, which we love, but we will provide obviously beer in cans if that's what people are looking for.
Are the bottles a little bit of a tip of the hat to the wine culture of Niagara? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. I mean, it's an Italian sparkling bottle. Like, it's a sparkling wine bottle, effectively, that we use. So it definitely is. When we were originally laying out what we wanted to brew and still are brewing all these bigger beers, sour beers and big IPAs all tend to be higher ABV. And so we thought of them as more of a sharing experience where it is similar to a bottle of wine. You crack it open, you share it with your partner or your friends. And we wanted part of the experience of our brews to be part of that social experience also.
Yeah, that is true. I don't know what it is about, like, even if it's a 500 milliliter bottle of beer, it does seem more shareable. When you have a can, it's more of an independent experience. I don't know what that is.
Even though it's pretty close, like it's 473 to 500. And
yeah,
the 500
the same
ones
amount,
do look pretty big.
But just the bottles, like, don't you agree?
Yeah.
Like, it does seem like a more of a, you can share a bottle of beer. Can,
there's
a
psychological difference. Yes, I agree.
Maybe it's just like a embedded cultural thing. The tall boy, just like, I'm drinking it all.
Boy.
I'm drinking a lot of it.
Interesting. Well, we're well aware of the bottle, your bottle, I should say, because when we host our events, often we have individuals who are gluten-free. And believe it or not, it's a little bit difficult to find craft gluten-free beer, but one of the best.
A little difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
Be serious, Andy.
but a wonderful Southern Ontarian brewery that makes terrific gluten-free beer is the Exchange Brewery. Can you tell us a little bit about your gluten-free beer and why do you make it?
Yeah, so it's one that came to be because we had a lot of people coming into the tasting room and asking for it, and quite frankly, there weren't a lot of good options on the market. There are actually a reasonable number of options on the market, but not ones that particularly taste like beer or get beyond kind of a lager replica. And so our brewers played around with it for a while, working with different gluten-free grains to see what could work. And they came up with what has been a very successful recipe that we have not touched in years, because it is one that we have people, every time we release it, we had a bunch of orders. People are always asking when it's coming up. The biggest request we've got is whether we are willing to make some additional styles, which we have begun to think about. We'd actually been thinking about it pre-pandemic, and then, as you guys appreciate, you get into pivot mode and are reinventing yourself. So we hope to have the chance to kind of reconsider doing that, because we know it is a product that is sought after, and we've won a bunch of beer awards for it. So I am confident we do it well. So we want to keep doing it.
Yeah, you definitely do it very, very well. Can you tell us a little bit about exactly how you produce a gluten-free beer? You don't have to give away any secrets, but a type of grain that you would choose that is gluten-free?
So that is a better question for my brewer than it is for me, because I was not actually involved in the experimentation and the production, but I am happy to connect you with him if you want to pick his brain a bit and get a lot more detail on beer.
In the following clip, Robin speaks with head brewer Sam Maxbauer about the Exchange Brewery's gluten-free beer.
All right, this is Sam Maxbauer, the Exchange Brewery's amazing head brewer, who joined us. He is from Michigan and had been working at Jolly Pumpkin, but joined back in 2014 while we were still in the design stage. But Sam, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions in regards to our gluten-free beer. What inspired the creation of the gluten-free beer? Why did we decide to make it the first time?
We started experimenting with gluten-free options just to be able to bring everybody into the brewery and be able to have an option for everybody. So we didn't have any other gluten-free options that we really liked, and so that we kind of took it upon ourselves to make a gluten-free option that was also very tasty and not just a light lager or a very like light blonde beer that we typically see gluten-free options as.
Great. And so how did you come up with the grain bill that is in our gluten-free Saison?
We tried a bunch of different kind of pseudo cereals and other grains and ended up with buckwheat. I know we even tried things like chia seeds and a few other grains, kind of non-traditional gluten-free grains. And we ended up with buckwheat. We really liked the flavor from it. It has this really like earthy, nutty flavor. And we found it paired really well with sorghum, which was the other main sugar source for the beer we actually are making now.
Okay, and do we have any intentions of expanding our gluten-free line? Are we sticking with one for now, or do you think there might be more to come?
There hopefully will be more to come. We're doing some R&D currently, and we're hoping to release at least one and maybe two new gluten-free options by the end of 2022.
Amazing. Thank you, Sam, for the intel.
The building itself, Robin, I believe, I could be wrong about this, I believe you expanded in the back as well. Like I've just sort of walked around the corner onto Queen Street and just seen the beautiful back patio that you have. That seems to be new. I could be wrong about that, but it seems like you've added on additional outside space.
Yeah, so when we opened back in 2016, we didn't have any outdoor space. And then in the following summer, 2017, we did expand and build a kind of second floor deck, which was our outdoor seating. And we have our whole back wall is kind of these bifold doors that open up. So it basically becomes an indoor-outdoor space on the second floor, which is lovely during the summer. And then we took it one step further through the last two seasons because of the pandemic. And we actually rented our neighbor's backyard and have effectively run a pop-up beer garden in the backyard of the apothecary, which is actually a pharmacy museum, but it hasn't been running the last two seasons because it is usually run by retired pharmacists who have not wanted to be interacting with the public. So unfortunate for them, they haven't been able to run, but great for us that we were able to create this beer garden, which certainly helped us a lot through those times when people either weren't allowed or frankly just didn't want to be eating indoors due to COVID.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Where your brewery's located is interesting. I was thinking about this today. We talked to brewery owners and head brewers a lot, and something that always comes up is a main way for a craft brewery to flourish and to stay healthy is to delve far into the community. So being an entity towards the local community, and that seems to be an engine for economic success for a craft brewery. However, your location is interesting because you're in one of the most heavily trafficked tourist locations. So is it fair to say that you're a little bit of an anomaly in terms of how you brand yourself? Because you can have a very strong presence in terms of the Niagara locals, the clientele, but also you have thousands, hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world passing your storefront every day, certainly in the summertime.
We have 3 million visitors to Niagara-on-the-Lake every year. 3 million. It's a lot of people.
Holy cow. Yes. And if you haven't been
yes.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
That was a very strategic decision to be located on the main street. Obviously, it's much more expensive per square foot to be located on the main street versus out on an agricultural property, 1 kilometer away. But I did that because I wanted the opportunity to basically expose our brews to as many different people as possible to get a really strong feedback loop. And so because we are constantly experimenting with new brews, it's a really great way that we constantly have new people coming in the door and can, release new beers, see what works, see what doesn't in a very quick turnaround. It's not, we have our regulars obviously who come in all the time, but we also have new people that walk in every door. And they provide such important consumer insight to us into how our products we'll do once we take them to grocery or the LCBO. So it's a very valuable consumer base, I think, that we have access to, that it's not just the locals, it's locals plus a bunch of other people visiting from across Ontario and from across Canada, and usually the US, but not the last 2 years.
Yeah, I would think that might be, I don't know, I think that might be daunting, because you say for another brewery, off of the main street, like an Oast brewery, which is a large craft brewery in Niagara-on-the-Lake, but in more of a rural setting, you're probably more ingrained with the local clientele, and you can kind of gauge a little bit more about what the palate preferences are of your typical Niagara person. But you have to deal with, okay, what does the typical Chinese tourist like to consume, and what does the typical person from the United States like to consume? It just seems like you're marketing to the entire planet, not only the town of Niagara-on-the-Lake.
Yeah, yes. And again, less so in the last 2 years. But yes, we are. And we, our ambitions are to grow over the coming years. And so as we didn't start with just the intention of being just a local watering hole, we wanted to serve a local need, be a presence in our community, but also expand beyond it. And I think having access to those consumers walking in our door is very valuable. Now, do we get some people who come in and say, can I try your lightest beer? Yes. And, it makes me cringe every time I hear it, but, we direct them to our Hellas Lager or our Session IPA or whatever. And we happily serve them, although we might not learn as much from them.
There's a beer out there for everybody.
That's right. That is right. We even now have a hop seltzer, which is just effectively a bubbly, but rather than having a hint of fruit, it has a hint of hops. And so that's another product. If you want something really light, we can offer you that.
We've seen a few of those in the market now. They're becoming very, very popular.
It's great.
Just, bubbly hop water. I feel like the aroma of beer, but don't want any of the booze or the malt.
Yeah. And they're, zero gluten, zero sugar, 0 calories. Even I like to have, because I do like big IPAs. So, there's only so many I can drink of those in one night, but to kind of mix it up and have an IPA and then a hop seltzer and an IPA, it means I can stay around a little bit longer.
Isn't that, it's funny you mentioned, I think that was exactly what one of our guests, I believe it was the gentleman from Spearhead, Andy. I think he said that. He's like, you gotta have one in between so you can stay productive.
Oh, there you go.
That's right. Yeah, layer them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Robin, the Niagara's confusing being a local, because you say Niagara, the Niagara region, Niagara Falls, Niagara-on-the-Lake. There's, I think, 9 or 11, I don't even know, like 11 different municipalities in the region.
Municipalities, yes, I think there's 11.
Yeah. So it's kind of confusing. It's kind of like 10 little towns and cities smushed together to make out about maybe 500,000 people. Do you see that? I see Niagara as really interesting because there are so many craft breweries popping up. It really, particularly in the last 5 years, the market has exploded. It has exploded all over the country, but in Niagara, certainly especially. Do you see this market as becoming a little bit of not a competition, but rivaling a little bit the dominant alcoholic beverage market of Niagara that is wine? Do you see that kind of shaping to one day be a competitor? Do you think it's getting there? Do you think it's already there?
Yeah, I think I'd like to think of them as being more complementary than competitive, but for sure we've seen a big growth in craft breweries in Niagara and the Niagara region. And I definitely think it's great news. I think that as the industry grows and as Niagara becomes a destination for beer lovers, that benefits all of us. It's kind of the rising tide floats all boats thing. And I hope that Niagara will become for beer what, San Diego is in the US or Belgium is in Europe, as far as being kind of like the mecca of beer in those regions. And I hope Niagara becomes that in Canada, and I think we're kind of well on our way to that. I don't know which other region you'd say kind of has a better concentration of great breweries than Niagara.
I think there are none.
A large region.
There you
like
go.
that, yeah, probably not many.
Yeah, not many. Just because like it is a pretty big area geographically, and like we mentioned, there are so many different townships and cities that there's just so much. I think something too, I always think this is weird that I wish that there was a bit more of a partnership or a shared identity with the cross border. There doesn't really seem to be. Actually, we shot a video recently. We went over the border actually to Buffalo, and there's so many craft breweries in the Buffalo area and in Western New York. Like if you really like kind of partnered as an identity, it would double in size, but it doesn't really seem to be the case. Both have there is that border literally in between that does separate the two.
Yeah, and the border when it comes to booze is a big pain in the butt. So we have tried to do things like beer festivals where it's all the Niagara breweries from both sides of the river. The issue is with the bureaucracy that is our LCBO, it is extraordinarily painful to try to import a keg that isn't already listed at the LCBO. And so, there's so many barriers to us doing much beyond just talking to each other. There's not a lot we can do to kind of cross, like do festivals or have each other's beer in each other's breweries or that stuff. It just isn't practical, unfortunately. But it would be. There are across, particularly in Buffalo, there's a bunch of great breweries as well.
Would that also play into, like, let's say a collaboration? Like collaborations can all be different, whether you're actually using the beer at each spot, but if you just went over the border to work with breweries, and then let's say you wanted to bring that back here to sell, I'm assuming there'd probably still be some red tape around that, even though it's, I don't know, your own technically, but I don't know how that might work.
Well, you can get a bit creative around it. We did a collaboration with Jolly Pumpkin where our brewer went down there, brewed a batch, then their brewer came up here and brewed a batch. So we each had one batch that we had brewed together, one at their location, one at our location, and we each just sold the batch that we had sold at our own location, so we could take the border out of it. But it, same recipe, same people brewing it. It was the same beer. So that is a creative way you can kind of get around some of it.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. For, short of bootlegging stuff across the border, there's, still things craft breweries can do. That's good. It's good to know.
Yeah, exactly.
That could be a cool experiment, the bootlegging lager. Might not be a good business risk, but Robin, if you don't mind, I'll shift a little bit to the styles of beer a little bit further than just the gluten-free beer that we spoke about. You do specialize. I mean, you have quite the variety of beer that you do produce, but you do seem to have an interest in Belgian-style beer, and you did mention a little bit about the natural ingredients you like to use, but can you expand a little bit about Belgian style beers, why that's interesting to you, why you see that as an interesting market to explore?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the interest came from Sam, our brewer, and I both love these beers. I think a lot of it comes from the fact that we like dry beers, and a lot of these barrel-aged Belgian beers are quite dry and funky. Depending on how long they've been in barrels, they have varying degrees of this kind of the funk and the sourness. And I personally adore sour beers, and so we do a full range of those. So things like our spontaneous ale that I mentioned earlier is something that we really love, and it's different every year depending on what effectively falls out of the sky. But it's also a blend of 3 different years, so it evolves over time. But it's a really interesting, neat beer. We love doing our fruited beer. We have a peach one, we have a raspberry one, we have a cherry one. They're all dry fruit. We do not like sweet beers at the Exchange, but they've got the fruitiness without the sweetness, and often a good amount of tartness as well. And then we do other Belgian-style beers. So we do a golden ale, which is a Belgian-style barrel-aged one. We do a peppercorn rye, which is another. We do various versions of the saison, including our gluten-free, which is also another. I would say Belgian style, although technically it might be French, but it's Belgian. So yeah, we love our barrels. We love playing around with the different beers, and we're always experimenting. We stay kind of probably more true to the core styles, but we play a lot where we'll do things like a cocktail series where we'll play around with, a gin inspired one, which we had at the LCO, where the Twig and Berry was the name of it. But it's a Belgian based beer that then has the botanicals of gin that are included in the brew. So there's so much you can do within Belgian beer. And I think historically, there hasn't been as much available that is Belgian style in Ontario. I think we've come a long way in the last couple of years, thankfully. But we've always loved introducing people to new styles of beer that they might not have tried otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always, when you note that something is a Belgian style beer, that seems very vast, doesn't it? It's like, that could mean a lot of things.
Yeah. I mean, to us, it generally means it uses a Belgian yeast and it goes through barrels, would be kind of the cheap at the Coles Notes version of how to identify the beers that are Belgian.
Yeah. Now, Robin, do you have some flagship beers that you continually produce, or is it? I think you do. Can you tell us a little bit about them?
Yeah. So, I mean, our New England IPA is our IPA that we've been producing very consistently since we launched it. It's been in grocery stores and at the LCBO kind of continuously since we launched it. For the Belgian beers, our Golden Ale is probably our most flagship as far as it being on site and being one that we're very well known for. And then our Amber is another one that's just always been a crowd favorite, particularly amongst our locals here in town, which isn't a Belgian style beer, but it's an amber and it's a lovely ale that's delicious and kind of full of flavor. And then beyond that, I would say that I don't know if you can say a whole genre can be a flagship, but I would say our sours in general are certainly what we're very well known for.
Yeah, and a lot of good variety in those too. Like I was looking, you got Creeks and Grand Crus and a number of other different lambic styles. In a nutshell, I need to be going there very soon to try some. That's what I'm getting at, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Come down and visit us, and we'll show you around.
Yeah, Garrett's a sour boy.
Oh, awesome.
That's what they call me.
Amongst other things. Yeah, you mentioned a little bit, Robin, about expanding. You kind of made a little comment about that. Do you see Exchange as a very Niagara-rooted brewery? Do you have high ambitions to expand elsewhere, whether that be in just growing your production and having your beer in more LCBOs and beer stores and other places, or do you see yourself as a staple of Niagara on the Lake and its tourism industry?
Well, I definitely think we are very rooted in Niagara, and I don't see us producing beer outside of Niagara anytime in the near future. We certainly would like to expand production here, but I love being in the Niagara region, and I think it is a great place for us to continue to grow as a business as we look to expand our off-site sales to retail and across the country and eventually internationally as well. But we certainly plan to keep production here in Niagara for multiple reasons, because we want to have our barrels all together, because we want to have access to the agricultural and the kind of natural resources we have here. But also just from a kind of company culture perspective, I think being in Niagara is really core to who we are and where we want to be and kind of continue to support the community.
Mm-hmm. Is everything produced on site? It's all produced in the brewery on Queen Street in Nuttall. It's not.
Yes, it's all produced right here in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And so when you come to see it, we have a lot of storage off-site, but every ounce of beer we produce is made on our system here. Our little 10-barrel system, we designed it from scratch, so it's actually really well laid out, where we use the basement quite extensively. So what you see upstairs looks relatively small, but all the fermenters are downstairs, all the cold storage and all of the supporting mechanical equipment is down there, as well as our fooders, which are the giant barrels. But yeah, all the magic happens right on Queen Street.
Yeah, it's very good. It doesn't seem like too big of a space, but it kind of is, isn't it?
It's just big enough is what it is.
Just perfect, right? So how far does one have to go from downtown Niagara-on-the-Lake to find Exchange beer in terms of at different bars or in the LCBO or in beer stores?
Yeah, I mean, we're in places across the province, across around Niagara-on-the-Lake. Most of the local pubs like the Angel and Sand Trap, Garrison House, they all carry the Exchange beer, but so do the craft beer bars. A lot of craft beer bars in Toronto do. We often rotate things in with them. They love our sour beers and our special release beers in particular. So we hope, and particularly as everybody recovers over the next year, we look forward to kind of doing more of that again. But yeah, across LCBOs, at any given time, usually you can find us in a few dozen LCBOs across the province. We're in all of the Loblaws banners that sell beer, like Real Canadian Superstore and Theirs and Value Mart, and we're also in Metros and in Sobeys and in a few beer stores. We're not in many beer stores, but we are in our few local ones here.
In Niagara, yeah. Yeah. Shout out to the Angel Inn in Niagara-on-the-Lake. The best fish and chips. Yeah. It's also
Absolutely.
haunted, though.
Have you had their chicken curry? You can get it on half rice and half fries, and I highly recommend it.
That's right. It's quite famous, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's great.
Mm-hmm. But be careful of the ghosts in the Angel.
Yes,
they're
the
real.
Ghosts in the washrooms in particular.
They're very real.
Watch out.
Yeah, of course. I hate to bring up the subject because I think we're all sick of talking about it, but I will. This last close to 2 years now, 20 months, whatever it's been, obviously being connected to the tourism industry like you folks are. Can you tell us a little bit about how Exchange Brewery has weathered the storm, as it were, in terms of the pandemic?
Yeah, well, we're still standing, so I consider that to be success. But yes, it certainly has been a challenging couple of years, and thankfully I have a wonderful group of very bright and passionate staff at the brewery who have helped me pivot the business at every turn as we moved to online sales. We really invested in our website. We did a bunch of virtual events. We expanded our retail store to include a whole range of products beyond beer and merch, to get more into like meats and cheeses and soaps and stuff. So we did a lot to kind of invest where we could while our tasting room was shut down. We were grateful for having a retail presence at grocery and LCBO throughout that time, because I know a lot of craft breweries didn't have that, and I think it hurt that much more for them. But we survived it, I hope we survived it. We'll see what Omicron has in store for us, but so far we've survived it and feel excited and glad to be kind of coming out of this year in a position where we can look to grow and kind of continue on our path. Because it certainly has felt like we've been a bit on hold for the last 2 years, but we are kind of starting to reinvest. We've just purchased this canning line, and are doing all of our planning for 2022 and laying out kind of how we want to grow now that the world is hopefully, knock on wood, returning to normal. But, it is what it is. There's not much else to say. We survived, and we're looking forward to not having to deal with it in the future.
Trudging on. Hopefully, I'm sure there's a lot of people who want to just see it in the rearview mirror and focus on going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you said, so you said you're planning for 2022, as I'm sure most people are at this time. Is there anything big and fun and exciting happening for the exchange coming up in the new year?
Yeah, so I mean, as I mentioned, we've got this canning line that is being delivered, which is very exciting for us. But related to that, we're actually thinking of or planning to launch a sub brand, which the whole purpose of this brand is going to be to do fun, experimental, kind of more off the wall, clean beers as opposed to our barrel aged funky beers. And so we're really looking forward to having a lot of brews go through this brand. And not only are we excited about the beer and the recipes, we're really excited about the process of creating the brand and what its vibe is and kind of what it represents. And again, after the last 2 years where we've just been like, what do we do? How do we survive? It's nice to start thinking about something that's really creative and really positive and frankly, really fun for us all to dedicate some of our energy towards. So keep your eye out for that in 2022.
Sounds super exciting. Yeah, definitely to be proactive and do something fun for the business as opposed to just keeping it afloat. Yeah, that sounds great. A new sub brand. Hey, that sounds really cool. I like that. I like how you described it actually. So like fun and but still clean. So I feel like that's sort of a trend in the craft beer industry as of late, is that there, this reversion back to like cleaner, basic styles. I don't know if that's maybe exactly what you're getting at specifically. But yeah, it's really cool to see that. I'm excited to check that out.
Robin, can I ask about you seem like a passionate, resilient brewery owner, which is very exciting to see. Can I ask you about, yeah, can I ask you about the inception of the brewery in 2016? Was this always an industry that was particularly of interest to you? Is it something you grew into? Did you come at it as an entrepreneur, as a business person, seeing that, that this market is booming, and I know just opening a brewery in this particular spot would be such a sweet spot for the industry? Or was beer itself something that really resonated with you prior to thinking about opening a brewery?
Yes, well, it's probably kind of two things coming together that made me want to start a brewery. But for sure, I've always been a very passionate beer drinker. When I first started drinking, if I think back to my university age or days, all I drank was beer. All of my girlfriends drank wine and mixed drinks, and I just had no interest, and I loved beer. And at the time, it was Molson Canadian, but I thought it was way better than Labatt Blue because we didn't really have access to anything else. And I now cringe to think about what I drank all the time. But I loved lagers even then, and it was kind of my go-to drink. And then, I had a bit of an entrepreneurial bug, and I knew my dad had started a business, and I knew at some point I wanted to start a business, but I didn't really know what. And I went to business school down in the US, and that was the mid 2000s. And when I was living there at the time, the craft brewing scene was probably 15 years ahead in the US, and it was in Canada. So Canada, we had bland lagers, and that was all you could buy. And the U.S. had already kind of got into a wide range of beers, at least importing them, but also being produced locally. And so I tasted for the first time when I was living there, really hoppy IPAs. I had my first double IPA. I had my first Belgian beer. I had my first sour beer, which blew my mind. And so it was at that point that I was like, I love this. We should have this in Ontario. Why don't we? I'd like to start this business. And I was at school. I was at business school. And so I worked for one semester. I did an independent study with a professor where I was looking into the super premium beer market in Ontario. And I did a whole bunch of analysis on the market. And, my conclusion was, this is a great business opportunity. Our palates aren't fundamentally different in Ontario. Our supply has just been held back because of the weird retail environment we have there. And so I, at that point, was very dedicated to the idea of starting a brewery. I graduated in 2007, but at the time I was recently married. I was planning to have a couple kids. And so I didn't think bearing children and starting a brewery really went hand in hand at the same time. So I went back to my old job, had a couple maternity leaves, and then on my second maternity leave, that's when I wrote the business plan for the brewery. And, the rest is history. But for sure, it was a combination of bringing my passion for the product as a consumer together with my interest in starting a business and thinking that there was a good market opportunity here.
Yeah, really cool. And now 5.5, 6 years into it,
Yeah.
do you see the industry as still an interesting frontier? Do you see that the market has changed, certainly, and not even to mention COVID, it's just changed and expanded. And I think in this short amount of time, the typical Ontario consumer is a little bit more accustomed to craft beer. Do you still, I guess, are you still as passionate about this particular, perhaps the product, but also the market as well and the business potential? Does it still spark joy for you?
Yeah, well, in a lot of ways, I think our job has gotten easier over the years. When we first opened, I considered us to be as much beer educators as we were beer producers, because people would walk into the brewery, 98% of people had never even heard of a sour beer. And now it's amazing how much people do know. And it's kind of a joy to be able to, introduce them to something new, but on the basis that they already actually know quite a bit, as opposed you're starting from square one. So for sure, the market's evolved a lot in the last handful of years. I still think, A, there's a lot of runway, and B, I think there'll continue to be a lot of just innovation in craft beer as breweries continue to play around and figure out what really resonates with consumers. So I think we're going to see a lot of good things in the next few years. My biggest fear is that we might see a bunch of small breweries go under in the next year, because it's been a tough couple of years and the government supports have gone away and revenues haven't fully recovered yet. And so I worry we're going to lose some great breweries in the coming months, as we've already seen start to happen in the last 6 months. But the reality is the remaining breweries hopefully will then double down and kind of continue to innovate and be creative. And I think there's continued room for growth in the market. Absolutely. And I think we will see a continued shift away from macro towards craft in Ontario.
Mm-hmm. We think so too. We certainly hope so. I think the last figure, we've mentioned this a few times, I think, and again, it's a little tough to define.
Biased, I guess.
What's that? Sorry? What?
We're a little biased at the same time.
Yeah, certainly. Biased in a good way. But I think the figure is, it's difficult to exactly pinpoint what is and isn't craft beer, but I think it's something around in Canada, it's something like craft beer only takes about 6% of the market share, something like that. So, and so, in terms of, if you look at it that way, there seems to be enormous potential and growth for more craft breweries.
Absolutely. And, you have areas in the U.S., the average is higher in the U.S. for sure, but you have areas in the U.S. where it's north of 20% craft beer. And you might not get that in every community across Ontario, but I think a lot of them would shift that way. And it's just a matter of giving it a bit more time. We are pretty new at really having a developed craft beer scene, and what the U.S. has been doing for almost 30 years. We're a couple decades behind them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll catch up eventually, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned, obviously, you started the exchange in 2016 and some of the accolades along the way, but from maybe, let's say, the building of that business plan for the Exchange Brewery all the way to where you are now, founding of the brewery, what would you say was the most enjoyable part of doing all that?
Well, there's no doubt that the most enjoyable part for me has been working with the team at the Exchange Brewery. The brewery is only as good as the people who are behind it, and I think I have been really lucky to work with an amazing group of people. The fact that our head brewer has been with us since a year and a half before the brewery even opened is amazing. And we just had a lot of staff. We have a low turnover at the brewery, and we just have a lot of really talented, bright people. And so for sure, that's what brings me the greatest joy, is working with such a capable and wonderful group of people who are passionate about the same things that I'm passionate about. And my staff has a lot of input into what we do, both from the beer we make to how we run the tasting room. We just did a brainstorming session 2 weeks ago where we were saying, if our goal is to be the most exceptional customer service experience at a brewery in the whole world, like, how do we do that? What do we want to look like? How do we want to change how we interact with customers? What our place is like? What our service is like? All of that. And it's listening to my team come up with fabulous ideas that really gets me excited, and I have a lot of joy in it. Now, it also can sometimes be the most challenging part of the business, particularly if you have an employee who you have to lay off. That really sucks. There's nothing fun about that. But for sure, the most rewarding for me is the people side of it. Another thing that's very specific that I get a lot of joy out of is when I have a customer who walks into the tasting room who proclaims that they don't drink beer and they don't like beer. And then we do a little bit of digging into what drinks they do like. Do they like dark spirits? Do they like oaky Chardonnays? Do they like cocktails with lemon rind? Whatever. And then usually that can give us an indication of what their general taste preferences are. And 9 times out of 10, we then put a sample of one of our beers that doesn't taste like the drink that they like, but has some of the similar characteristics. And what I get so much joy out of is when, and it happens pretty regularly, someone says, I don't even like beer and I love this. And it's just why I got into this, because I knew that, people, particularly, there's a lot of women who think they don't like beer, and it's because they don't like bland lagers. And when they try all these different styles, of which there's a gazillion of, they realize they do like some styles of beer. They just don't like bland lagers. And that makes me happy to introduce people to a whole other beverage category that they believe they didn't like.
Absolutely. Like I said, there's a beer out there for everyone. I think Andy and I are in the same mindset. Like whenever we're running our events, our biggest goal is to expand one's, idea of what, not just craft beer, what beer can actually be. So I can definitely relate to that. I think Andy and I have had a couple of those moments too, and they feel pretty wonderful. Definitely agree.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a profound place to stop. Robin Ridesic from Exchange Brewery on Queen Street in beautiful Niagara on the lake. Robin, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me, gentlemen. Have a great evening.
You as well. Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care.
Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all our interviews and beer-related content. Remember, craft beer is here.